They built a bridge in her name, brass plaque and everything. Hinton's mayor stood at the ribbon cutting with tears on his face, and the whole town clapped. And Renata Solis was 31 feet below them. My name is Arlo Mendieta. I'm 43. I pour concrete for a living. Foundations, retaining walls, commercial slabs. I've been doing it for 19 years, and in all that time I never once thought my job would be the thing that cracked a murder open. The mayor of Hinton, West Virginia, a man I'd known since I was 26, killed a woman and buried her under a bridge. And then he named the bridge after her. He stood up there every year on the anniversary and gave a speech about how Renata deserved better. And the whole town, they knew something was wrong. They felt it, but nobody said a word. Because Gideon Pratt wasn't just the mayor. He was Hinton. And for 4 years, that was enough to keep everyone quiet. I'm going to tell you how that changed. How I stood on that bridge at 2 a.m. and watched the most respected man in Summers County crawl out of his truck with a pickaxe. But that's not even the part that wrecked me. The part that wrecked me is what happened after. If you're about to spend the next 45 minutes with me, I need you to hit subscribe. Because what Gideon Pratt said to me in front of the county courthouse, the exact words, I still hear them. That's coming. And what Renata's brother did at the town memorial, you need to hear that. Hit the like button. It matters more than you think. And wherever you're watching this from, whatever time it is, drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's out there. Let me take you back to March of 2019, the last time anyone saw Renata alive. Hinton is small. I don't mean small like a suburb. I mean small like the gas station clerk knows your blood type. Population fluctuates around 2,700, maybe less, depending on who left for Beckley or Charleston that year. It sits in the gorge where the Greenbrier meets the New River. Beautiful place. The kind of place where the mountains feel like they're holding you in. I moved there in 2003 to work a bridge contract and just never left. Married a woman named Colette who grew up 2 streets over from the courthouse. We had a good life. Quiet. I poured foundations. She managed the front desk at the Summers County Health Department. We knew everyone. Renata Solis lived 4 houses down from us on Temple Street. She ran a tutoring program out of the old Elks Lodge, free for the kids from the coal camps up Route 20. 3 afternoons a week, she'd have 11, 12 kids in there with workbooks and those little juice boxes. She wasn't from Hinton originally, came from Lewisburg, but she'd been there long enough that people stopped calling her an outsider. She was 28. Dark hair she always wore pulled back. Laughed loud. I mean loud. You could hear her from across the parking lot at Dairy Queen. The kids loved her. Everyone did. She was also on the board of the Hinton Education Fund, a small municipal account for school supplies, after-school programs, that kind of thing. I remember seeing her name in the meeting minutes once. Didn't think anything of it at the time. Gideon Pratt had been mayor since 2011. He ran the town the way some people run a family business. Personal, hands-on, favors and handshakes style. He knew every contractor, every business owner, every teacher. He approved budgets, zoning permits, road projects. If something got built in Hinton, Gideon's signature was on it. He was big, maybe 6'2", always wore a blue jacket to public events. Had this calm, steady voice that made everything sound reasonable. I liked him. I'm saying that because it matters later. I genuinely liked the man. The man buried a woman alive under concrete, and I shook his hand at barbecues. March 2019. Renata didn't show up to the tutoring session on a Wednesday. Nobody thought much of it. Thursday, same thing. By Friday, one of the parents called the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a man named Warren Oakes, drove out to her apartment, found the door locked, no signs of forced entry. He filed a missing persons report. And then, not much happened. Gideon stood up at a town council meeting 3 weeks later and said Renata had been going through personal difficulties. Said she'd mentioned moving back to Lewisburg. Said he'd spoken with her the week before she left. His voice cracked when he said it. People nodded. And that was it. Renata Solis was gone, and the town just absorbed it. Moved on. The way small towns do when looking closer would cost too much. I didn't think about it as hard as I should have. That's the part I have to live with.
The next few months, things settled back into routine. Colette and I went to the 4th of July cookout at Bluestone State Park. Gideon was there, flipping burgers, shaking hands. He asked me about my daughter's soccer season, normal stuff. I remember Colette laughing at something he said about the fireworks budget. We were standing there in the grass with paper plates, and it felt normal. That's what gets me now. But there were cracks, small ones. The first one came from Lena Mabry, who ran the diner on 3rd Avenue. I was in there one morning getting coffee. This was maybe August 2019. And we were talking about her new menu boards and whether laminated was better than chalkboard. And somewhere in the middle of that, she just said it. Not like she was building up to it, more like it fell out. "You ever notice Gideon stopped going to the Elks Lodge?" I said I hadn't noticed. She said, "He used to go every Thursday. Stopped cold, March. Hasn't been back." I didn't think much of it. People change routines. But Lena had this look on her face. She went back to wiping the counter, but her hand wasn't really moving. She was just pushing the rag in circles. Whatever she knew, she wasn't ready to say it out loud. The second crack was different, blunter. I was doing a driveway job for Orville Peck out on Ballingy Road. Orville was 70-something, retired railroad. While I was setting forms, he came out with a glass of water and said something that stuck with me. No preamble, no warm-up. He just said it. "That Solis girl didn't run anywhere. Her car was still at the apartment when Warren went over there." I asked him how he knew that. He said, "Because I drove past it the next morning. Blue Honda with the cracked taillight. Still sitting right there." I said maybe someone picked her up. "Maybe," he said, and then he went back inside. Screen door banging shut behind him. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. But Hinton doesn't work that way. You don't push. You don't pry. If something doesn't sit right, you swallow it and move on. Because the alternative is becoming the person everyone avoids at the diner. Sheriff Oakes made a statement in October 2019 that the case was inactive pending new leads. That was his exact phrase. Inactive pending new leads. Which is a polite way of saying nobody's looking. And Gideon, this is the part that should have screamed at me. Gideon proposed the Memorial Bridge project in November, 4 months after Renata vanished. He stood up at a council meeting and said the town should honor her memory by replacing the old footbridge over the Greenbrier at Bell Point. Said the new bridge would carry her name. At the ribbon cutting, I think it was April 2020, Gideon shook my hand afterward. Big smile. He said, "Arlo, we ought to get you on the next project. This is the kind of work that builds a town." Friendly, warm, his hand on my shoulder, everybody watching. He complimented me 10 feet above the woman he killed. The council approved the bridge unanimously. Construction started in January 2020. A crew out of Princeton did the foundation work. I wasn't involved. Gideon hired outside contractors for that phase. At the time, I figured it was a budget thing. Now I know why. The Renata Solis Memorial Bridge was completed in April 2020. The ribbon cutting happened on a Saturday. Gideon gave a speech. Renata's brother, Mateo Solis, drove up from Greenbrier County. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at that brass plaque. He didn't speak, didn't cry, just stood there. The sun was on his face, and he didn't blink. I walked up to him afterward and said I was sorry about his sister. He looked at me, I remember this, and said, "She didn't leave, Mr. Mendieta. She didn't leave." I told him I hoped they'd find answers. He said, "Answers aren't hiding, people are." And then he walked back to his truck and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear down Route 3, and I stood there in the parking lot for a long time. The taste of barbecue from the cookout was still in my mouth, and it made me sick. 3 years went by. Renata's name came up less and less. The bridge became just a bridge. People walked their dogs across it. Kids rode bikes over it on summer evenings. The plaque got a layer of green from the river moisture. Life went on. I thought about Mateo's words sometimes. People are hiding. But thinking and doing are different things. And I was busy. I had contracts across 3 counties. Colette and I were dealing with her mother's health. She'd had a stroke in 2021. I
I was driving to Beckley 3 times a week for physical therapy appointments that weren't mine to go to, but Colette needed me in the car. I didn't have the bandwidth to chase a feeling.
And I keep going back to this. There's a kind of guilt that's quiet enough to live with. You tell yourself it's not your problem. You tell yourself someone else will handle it. And every week, the guilt gets a little quieter until you almost can't hear it anymore. Almost. Have you ever done that? Known something was wrong, really known it, but told yourself it wasn't yours to carry? I think most of us have. I think that's the thing nobody wants to admit. If that's you, tell me in the comments. Not to judge. I'm the last person who gets to judge anyone. But I think we need to say it out loud sometimes. Because if I'd listened to that feeling 3 years earlier, Renata wouldn't have spent 3 more years under that bridge. Then, in June of 2023, the city put out a bid for emergency repair on the Memorial Bridge. A section of the south railing had shifted during spring flooding. Structural assessment flagged concerns about the eastern foundation pier. I submitted a bid. Lowest qualified. Gideon signed the contract himself. I remember that morning driving out to the bridge with my coffee still warm. There was fog coming off the Greenbrier and the mountains were just outlines. Colette had packed me a sandwich, turkey and Swiss, the way she always does, with mustard on only one side. For a second, it was just a nice morning and a new contract. That's the thing. He handed me the contract across his desk at City Hall and shook my hand. Room 204. I remember the fluorescent light was buzzing and there was a West Virginia state flag on a wooden stand in the corner. He said, "Arlo, you do good work. I trust you with this." Gideon's own decision. He picked me. He could have hired outside again, Princeton, Charleston, anybody. But he handed the contract to the one guy in town who'd know what a bad foundation looked like. I think about that a lot. And I took the contract and drove out to the bridge the next day to start my assessment. The repair scope was straightforward. Shoring up the eastern pier foundation, replacing the shifted railing section, waterproofing the deck surface. Standard stuff. I brought my excavator out on June 14th. The kid I hired helped me start digging around the pier base to assess the footing. We got about 4 feet down before I noticed something wrong with the concrete. Now, at first, I thought Kanawha Valley Paving, the outside crew from Princeton that did the original foundation in 2020, I thought they'd cut corners. Cheap aggregate, bad mix ratios. I see it all the time. Companies underbid, then save money on materials. I figured this was going to be a budget dispute. An insurance claim maybe, nothing more. But the more I dug, the less that theory held. It wasn't just inconsistent. The bottom layer, the original pour from 2020, had a different aggregate mix than the upper section. That's unusual. It happens sometimes with rushed jobs, but the transition was too clean. Like someone had poured the bottom section separately, waited, then finished the pier later. I've been doing this work since I was 24. I know what a staged pour looks like. This was staged. I didn't say anything to the kid, I just kept digging. By the end of the day, I'd exposed about 7 feet of the eastern pier. The bottom section, roughly 30 to 31 inches, was different, denser, and the rebar pattern didn't match the structural plans on file at City Hall. I'd pulled those plans myself. The as-built drawings showed continuous rebar from the footing up. What I was looking at had a break at the transition line. I sat in my truck that evening and stared at the bridge for maybe 20 minutes. The brass plaque was right there, eye level from the driver's seat. Renata Solis Memorial Bridge, dedicated April 2020. Hinton remembers. Something was under that pier. I couldn't prove it yet, but I felt it in a way that made my hands go still on the steering wheel. I called Mateo Solis the next morning. It took me 30 minutes to find his number. I went through the Lewisburg phone directory, then tried the Greenbrier County Assessor's office because I remembered he worked in land surveying. He picked up on the 4th ring. I told him who I was. He remembered me. I told him I was working on the bridge. I told him about the concrete. Long silence. And then a sound I wasn't expecting, something sharp, like he'd inhaled too fast. Not a gasp, exactly. More like he'd been holding his breath for 4 years and someone had punched it out of him. Then he said, "What are you telling me?" I said I didn't know yet. I said the foundation didn't match the plans. I said I thought we needed to look deeper.
literally deeper. He said, "Mr. Mendieta, I've been calling Warren Oaks once a month for 3 years. He stopped returning my calls in 2021. I told him I wasn't calling to offer hope. I was calling because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy."
"You're not crazy," he said. His voice cracked on the second word, and then he pulled it back, like he was angry at himself for letting it out. I went back to the site the next morning, told the kid I needed to do additional foundation assessment, deeper excavation, soil density testing, standard language that wouldn't raise flags. I rented a ground-penetrating radar unit from a company in Beckley. Cost me $1,400 out of pocket. I told Colette it was for the job. The GPR scan on June 17th showed an anomaly at approximately 31 feet below the bridge deck, in the soil directly beneath the eastern pier's original pour. Something was down there that wasn't rock, wasn't rebar, wasn't aggregate. The radar signature was consistent with an organic density object roughly 5 feet in length. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and I couldn't move. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them flat on my knees to make them stop, but they wouldn't stop. I just sat there. 20 minutes, maybe 30. The kid came over and asked if I was okay, and I said, yeah, I just needed a minute. He went back to the excavator, and I could hear him scraping around, but it sounded like it was coming from very far away. I drove to the county assessor's office that afternoon. I asked to see the original construction permits for the bridge project. The 2020 permits, not the repair permits. The clerk pulled the file. I went through it page by page. The concrete delivery invoice was dated January 8, 2020. The original contractor, Kanawha Valley Paving, billed for the foundation pour on January 11th, but the permit for the foundation excavation wasn't filed until January 13th, 2 days after the pour. That's backwards. You don't pour a foundation before the excavation permit is filed, not unless you're in a hurry to fill a hole that was already dug. I photocopied everything, every page. Then I drove home, sat at the kitchen table, and called Mateo again. I told him what I found. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do we do?" And I said, "I didn't have a plan." I said, "I think we need to watch the bridge." I want to stop here and ask you something. And I'm not being rhetorical, I actually want to hear your answer. If you found what I found, the concrete, the radar, the permit dates, would you have called the sheriff? The same sheriff who closed the case? The one who stopped returning calls from a dead woman's brother? Or would you have done what I did? Gone quiet, bought a trail camera, and started watching? Because there's no right answer to that. Some of you are going to say, call the cops. Some of you are going to say, I should have gone to the state police right then, and you're probably right. But when the local law enforcement is part of the silence, you don't know who to trust. You just don't. Fight it out in the comments. I want to hear what you would have done, because I've second-guessed this decision every day since. And I think what Gideon did next proves that the window for acting was smaller than anyone realized. I set up a trail camera, the kind hunters use, motion-activated, infrared for night vision. I mounted it on a tulip poplar about 40 yards from the bridge, angled toward the eastern pier. This was June 19th, 2023. For 3 nights, nothing. Just deer and a raccoon. On the 4th night, June 22nd, the camera captured a Ford F-150 pulling up to the bridge at 1:47 a.m. The driver got out. Even in infrared, I recognized the height, the build, the way he walked. Gideon Pratt. He had a flashlight and what looked like a pry bar. He walked directly to the eastern pier, the exact area I'd been excavating. He knelt down and shined the flashlight into the excavation trench I'd left open. He stayed there for about 4 minutes. Then he got back in his truck and left. He was checking. He knew what was down there, and he was checking to see how close I'd gotten. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the laptop open, watching the footage on loop. Colette came down around 3 and asked what was wrong. I told her I was reviewing job footage. She stood in the doorway in her robe for a minute, and I could feel her wanting to push it, but she didn't. She just said, "Don't stay up too late," and went back upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close, and I sat there thinking about how many more nights I could keep this from her before it broke something between us. The next morning, I got a call from Gideon's office.
His assistant said the mayor wanted to discuss the bridge project scope. I drove to City Hall at 10. Gideon was sitting behind his desk, same room, 204, same buzzing light. He smiled when I walked in, that calm, steady voice. He said, "Arlo, how's the repair coming?" I said it was on schedule.
He said, "I've been thinking. The scope might be more limited than we planned. The railing fix and the deck surface, that's priority. The foundation pier, that's probably fine as is. The flooding didn't really compromise the footing, did it?" I said the structural assessment was still ongoing. He leaned forward. "Between us, the budget on this project is tight. I'd hate to see the town spend money on unnecessary excavation when the real issue is the railing." He paused. "You know how the council gets about overruns." The way he said it, the way his voice dropped on budget. For half a second I thought, maybe this is just a budget thing. Maybe I'm seeing something that isn't there. That's how good he was. He could make you doubt what your own eyes told you. I said, "The footing shows signs of staged pouring. I want to document it properly." Something tightened around his eyes, just for a second. Then he said, "You're thorough. That's what I like about you. But let me talk to the council about scope. I'll get back to you." That was June 23rd. By June 25th, I got a letter from the city clerk stating that the bridge repair contract had been revised. Foundation excavation was removed from the scope, effective immediately. He pulled it right out from under me. Here's where I need to stop and think for a second. Because what Gideon did next, the thing he said to Colette at the Hinton grocery on 3rd, that's something I still can't talk about without my jaw tightening. He saw her in the produce section, walked right up to her, and he said, "Colette, I hope Arlo isn't overworking himself on that bridge job. You know how he gets with details. Sometimes a man sees problems that aren't there, and I'd hate for that to affect his reputation. He does such good work." She came home and told me word for word. She said Gideon was smiling the entire time. That big, warm smile like he was doing her a favor. That's how he operated. Not threats, not yelling. Friendly concern. A hand on your shoulder while he squeezed. I did something I should have done from the start. I called the West Virginia State Police. Not the Hinton Sheriff. Not Warren Oakes, who hadn't returned Mateo's calls in 2 years. I called the Lewisburg Detachment, Troop 6, and asked to speak with an investigator. The state police detective who took the call listened to everything. I told her about the concrete, the GPR scan, the permit dates, the trail camera footage of Gideon at the bridge at 1:47 a.m. I told her about Renata Solis and about the fact that nobody in Summers County had looked at this case since 2019. She was quiet for maybe 10 seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Mendieta, how soon can you get me those files?" I drove to Lewisburg the next day, June 27th. Brought photocopies, the GPR printout, a USB drive with the trail camera footage. The detective sat across from me in a small interview room with a metal table and no windows. She went through everything, twice. She had this way of reading where her pen hovered over the page without touching it, and every few lines she'd make a small sound, not a word, just air through her teeth, and keep going. She said, "The permit chronology alone would justify a search warrant, but the GPR anomaly makes this urgent." She said it the same way I'd say a foundation has cracked. Professional, clinical, but there was something underneath it. 4 years this woman had been buried, and the detective used the word urgent like it was the most controlled version of what she actually felt. She told me not to return to the bridge site. She told me not to contact Gideon. She told me the state police would take it from here. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while. The engine was off and I could hear the cicadas through the closed windows. I thought about Colette inside making dinner. I thought about the fact that I'd probably have to tell her everything soon, and I didn't know how to start that conversation. I also thought about the retirement fund we'd been building. 20 years of concrete work, and what I had to show for it was a house that was mostly paid off and a reputation in 3 counties. Both of those things were about to take a hit. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing. The thing I was afraid of, and I didn't say this to anyone, not Colette, not Mateo, was that this was going to make me the enemy. Not of Gideon, of everyone. That I was going to be the man who broke Hinton. And once you're that person, you don't get to unbe that person. Mateo drove up from Lewisburg and met me at a gas station off I-64. We sat in his truck for an hour. He didn't say much. At one point he said, 4 years. 4 years she's been under there while they walk over her. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't.
The detective moved fast. I found out later she'd been working cases in Greenbrier County for 11 years and had never seen a permit chronology that backwards. She told me once that the paper trail was so clear, it almost felt like Gideon hadn't expected anyone to check, like the arrogance was built right into the records. The state police got a search warrant signed by a circuit judge in Greenbrier County on June 29th. A forensic excavation team from the state crime lab arrived in Hinton on the 30th. I was not at the bridge when they dug. They told me to stay away. But Colette was at work at the health department, and her office window faced the river. She called me at 2:15 p.m. She said, "Arlo, there are 6 state police vehicles at the bridge. They have a tent up." Her voice was steady, but I could hear her breathing faster than normal. I told her to stay at work. I told her not to go near it. I told her I'd explain everything when she got home. There was a pause, and she said, "You already knew, didn't you?" Not a question. By 4 p.m., it was on the local news. By 6 p.m., the state police issued a statement confirming that human remains had been recovered from beneath the foundation of the Renata Solis Memorial Bridge. I drove to Lena's diner that evening. I don't know why. I think I needed to see something normal. But when I walked in, there were 4 people in the whole place. 4. Dinner rush, and 4 people. Lena was behind the counter polishing glasses that were already clean. She looked at me when the bell over the door rang, and her face it folded, like she'd been holding it up all day, and now she couldn't anymore. She didn't say a word. She poured me a coffee, and her hand was shaking. That was the silence. Not a sound. Not a thing you could point to. Just every occupied booth looking at the table. The television behind the counter was turned off. Outside, a truck went past and it felt loud enough to be an explosion. Everyone knew. They'd always known. Or they'd known enough to feel sick when the news hit. And now that sick feeling had a body attached to it. Gideon Pratt was arrested at his home at 8:41 p.m. on June 30th, 2023. The charge was second-degree murder, pending forensic identification. He was taken to Southern Regional Jail in Beaver. Bail was set at $500,000. Hit subscribe. Hit it right now. I need you here for what comes next. But here's what I need you to understand. The arrest wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. Because this town I'd lived in for 20 years, didn't rally behind Renata. They didn't rally behind me. Half of them rallied behind Gideon. I thought the arrest would change things. I thought people would exhale. I thought someone might come up to me at the gas station and say, "You did the right thing." For about 72 hours, I believed it. Then the letters started. Not to me directly, to the Hinton News. Letters from residents. I read every one of them online. One said Gideon Pratt had done more for Hinton than anyone in 40 years, and that this was all being blown out of proportion. Another said outsiders, meaning the state police, didn't understand how things worked here. A third said I should be investigated for tampering with a city construction site. Tampering. I found a body, and they wanted to investigate me for tampering. The worst one came from someone who didn't sign their name. It said, Arlo Mendieta destroyed a good man's legacy over concrete samples and a grudge. I was reading that one on my phone when I walked out to my truck on July 12th and found the word liar keyed across the hood. Deep scratches. Through the paint, into the primer. I stood there in the IGA parking lot, holding my phone in one hand and looking at my truck with the other, and the anonymous letter was still on the screen. I drove home with it like that. Didn't bother filing a report with Warren Oaks. What would be the point? The town council held an emergency session on July 7th. 7 members. 5 of them had been appointed during Gideon's tenure. They voted 4-3 to issue a statement expressing full confidence in Mayor Pratt's decades of service and requesting that residents reserve judgment until the legal process concludes. 4-3. A woman's bones were under a bridge.
and they voted 4-3 to support the man who put her there. Sheriff Oakes, the man who closed Renata's case in 2019, issued his own statement. He said the original investigation had been conducted with the resources available at the time, and that no evidence of foul play was apparent during the initial review. Mateo called me that night. His voice was different, tight, angry, in a way I hadn't heard from him before. He said, "They're going to try to make this go away, aren't they?"
I said I didn't think they could. The state police had the remains. The forensic team was working on cause of death. This was bigger than Hinton now. He said, "You don't know this town the way I'm starting to." He was right. I didn't. Not yet. Colette sat on the porch that evening and she didn't say much. Finally, she said, "Is this going to stop?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Because I need you to be honest with me. Is this going to stop? Or is this going to be our life now?" I didn't have an answer. That's the truth. I just sat there with her and the crickets were loud, and the porch light was making that buzzing sound it always makes, and I thought, this is what it costs. This is exactly what it costs. And Gideon's attorney, his defense lawyer from Charleston, was already filing motions. Emergency motion to block further excavation. Emergency motion to suppress the GPR evidence. There was a hearing set for July 19th, 7 days. If the judge sided with the defense, the excavation would stop. The state police told me the timeline was tight. 7 days. That's what we had. I need to be honest with you about something too. There was a point, right around this time, where I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Not about finding Renata, about all of it. The cameras, the calls, the photocopies. If I'd just fixed the railing and resurfaced the deck and minded my business, my truck wouldn't have liar scratched into it. Colette wouldn't be sitting on the porch with that look on her face. I'd still be the contractor who does good work, not the contractor who tore the town apart. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, of course you did the right thing. She was under the bridge. And yeah, she was. But it's different when you're the one living it. When the people who used to wave at you in the grocery store look right through you. Silence has a price, but so does breaking it. And I was paying both. Would you have kept going? With the letters, the keyed truck, the council vote, the attorney filing motions to shut it all down? With a 7-day window before a judge might kill the whole investigation, would you have kept going? Or would that have been enough? Tell me. I need to hear it. Because I'm still not sure I made the right call, even now. But Renata was under that bridge, and someone put her there. So I kept going. The phone rang at 6:14 a.m. on August 3rd. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee I hadn't touched. I'd been waking up before dawn for weeks by then. The detective's voice was flat and clear. "Mr. Mendieta, we have a positive identification. Dental records confirm the remains are Renata Solis." I didn't say anything. She kept talking. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the posterior skull. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead since March 2019. She never left Hinton. She never went back to Lewisburg. She was murdered, and she was buried under a bridge named after her. And for 4 years, people walked over her every single day. Renata was under their feet, and they named her killer's bridge after her. The state police upgraded the charge to first-degree murder. They also opened an obstruction investigation into Sheriff Warren Oakes and 2 members of the Hinton Town Council. Gideon's attorney filed a motion to suppress the trail camera evidence. Said it was obtained through surveillance on public property without proper authorization. The judge denied it in 11 minutes, but Gideon wasn't done. He wasn't the type to go quietly. The preliminary hearing was set for September 15th at the Summers County Courthouse. I was called as a witness. I'd found the concrete anomaly and documented the permit discrepancy. Mateo was there. The detective was there. The courtroom was packed, every seat. People standing along the back wall. I could hear the air conditioning and it wasn't keeping up. Gideon walked in wearing a gray suit. He looked calm, almost relaxed. He nodded at people as he walked to the defense table. Some of them nodded back. I want you to sit with that. A man charged with burying a woman under a bridge walks into court, and people nod at him. That's Hinton. That's what community complicity looks like when it has a face.
I testified for 40 minutes. I described the concrete, the GPR scan, the permits, the trail camera. The defense lawyer tried to poke holes, asked if I was a forensic expert, asked if I had a personal grudge against the mayor, asked if I'd been drinking the night I reviewed the camera footage.
I said no to all three. I said I'm a contractor who pours concrete for a living, and I know what a staged foundation looks like. Somewhere in the middle of my testimony, a phone buzzed in the gallery. Loud. Everyone turned. It was an older woman in the second row fumbling with her purse. The judge stared at her until she got it silenced. And in that pause, this is a stupid detail, I know, I looked over at Gideon and he was watching me. Not the judge, not his lawyer, me. And his expression was, I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't anger, it was patience. Like he was waiting for me to run out of things to say. That look, I still see it sometimes. The detective testified after me. She presented the full evidence chain, the permit chronology, the construction invoices showing Gideon personally approved the foundation pour 3 days before the excavation permit was filed, phone records showing 11 calls between Gideon and Kanawha Valley Paving in the week before the pour, and the forensic team's finding that the soil composition directly beneath the pier was consistent with a manually dug cavity, not standard excavation. Then the prosecution played the trail camera footage. Gideon Pratt, 1:47 a.m., June 22, 2023, kneeling at the excavation trench with a flashlight and a pry bar. The courtroom went absolutely still. Not quiet, still, like the air had thickened. Gideon's hands went flat on the table. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. Gideon didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, and I saw, just for a second, his right hand trembling. Not the whole hand, just the fingers. A flutter, like a current going through them. Then he pressed them harder against the table, and it stopped. That was the crack. The only one I ever saw. The judge ordered the case bound over for trial. Gideon was remanded, no bail modification. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into the September sun. Mateo was sitting on the steps. He had his head in his hands. I sat down next to him. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Then he said, "She was 28. I said, "I know." He said, "She wanted to open a real learning center, not the Elks Lodge, a real place with computers." I said I didn't know that. "No," he said, "nobody did, because he took that from her." We didn't have any more words after that. He got up and walked to his truck, and I sat there. After a while, the courthouse emptied out, and the parking lot went quiet, and I sat on those steps. The concrete was warm from the sun. I drove home, and I made it about halfway before I had to pull over. I put the truck in park on the shoulder of Route 3, and my hands were shaking on the wheel, and I just sat there with the engine running. 5 minutes, maybe 10, cars going past, nobody stopping. I was fine. I needed a minute where nobody was looking at me. The trial started in November 2023 and lasted 9 days. I sat in the gallery every day. 3rd row, left side, same seat. Mateo was 2 rows ahead of me. He wore the same dark jacket every morning. I don't think he slept. His eyes had that look, not tired exactly, but hollow, like the inside had been scooped out, and what was left was just the watching. Between the hearing in September and the trial in November, 2 months passed. They were quiet months, but not peaceful. The town didn't talk about the case, not openly, but you could feel it under everything, in the way the woman at the post office looked at you a beat too long, in the way conversations at the hardware store went silent when I walked in. Mateo came up once during that stretch. We sat on the porch and he asked me if I thought the jury would be local. I said I didn't know. He said, "If it's local, he walks." I told him the venue hadn't been changed. He just nodded. The prosecution laid out the timeline. The detective presented her evidence methodically. Permits, phone records, construction invoices. Cell tower data placed Gideon's phone within 200 meters of Renata's apartment on the night of March 12, 2019, the last night she was seen alive.
But the moment that changed the trial was a former city clerk. She'd worked in the office next to Gideon's for 6 years. She took the stand on the 4th day, and her voice was so quiet the judge asked her to speak up twice. She said Renata had discovered discrepancies in the Hinton Education Fund, the municipal account Gideon administered. Approximately $43,000 had been diverted over 3 years to a personal account. Renata had confronted Gideon directly in his office on March 11th. The clerk was in the hallway. She heard raised voices. She heard Renata say, "I'm going to the state auditor." I think about that. Renata walked into that office and told a powerful man she was going to expose him. She did the thing the rest of us spent 4 years not doing. And 24 hours later, she was dead.
The clerk said she'd been scared to come forward for 4 years. Said Gideon had told her, calmly, the day after Renata vanished, "Sometimes people leave and it's best to let them go." That was his way, always calm, always reasonable. On the 7th day, the defense lawyer gave his closing. I won't repeat most of it, but at the end he looked at the jury and he said, "Mr. Mendieta is a concrete contractor, not a detective. He saw an irregularity and he built a conspiracy, and this county is paying the price for one man's imagination." I sat in my seat and I didn't move. My hands were in my lap. The foreman was watching the lawyer, and then she looked at me. Just for a second, I held her eyes. One man's imagination. I poured concrete for 20 years. I know what a grave looks like. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench. Mateo was next to me. Neither of us talked. At some point, Colette brought us sandwiches from the deli across the street. I couldn't eat mine. The fluorescent lights in that hallway were the same shade as the ones in room 204, and I kept thinking about Gideon handing me the contract, shaking my hand, saying, "I trust you with this." The foreman read the verdict at 4:47 p.m. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of misuse of public funds. Mateo didn't react, not right away. He sat there for maybe 3 seconds, and then he put his hand over his face. Not crying, just covering his eyes. Like the light was too much all of a sudden. I looked at Gideon. He was standing. His hands were at his sides. The judge was reading the remand order, and Gideon was looking past everyone at the wall behind the gallery. His jaw was working, that small, grinding motion, but his eyes were empty. The room was moving around him, and he was already gone. Sentencing came in January 2024. Life without parole. Sheriff Warren Oakes was indicted separately on 3 counts of obstruction. He resigned in October 2023. His trial is pending as of when I'm telling you this. 2 council members who voted to support Gideon resigned after the verdict. One of them sent me a text that said, "I'm sorry, I knew something was wrong and I chose not to see it." I didn't respond. I'm still not sure if I should have. The bridge was closed permanently after the remains were recovered. The state condemned it. Last I heard, the county is planning to demolish it. The brass plaque was removed by the state police as evidence. Mateo asked to keep it after the trial. They gave it to him. I don't know what he did with it. Months passed. Spring came. Hinton was different. Not in the way you'd think. Some people stopped talking to me. Not a lot, but enough that I noticed. The woman at the bank drive-thru who used to ask about Colette started just saying, "Have a good day." The couple 2 doors down stopped waving when they pulled into their driveway. Small things. The kind of things you can tell yourself you're imagining except you're not. Orville Peck, the old railroad man who told me about Renata's car back in 2019, he came by the house one Saturday with a case of beer and sat on the porch for 2 hours. He didn't apologize exactly. He said, "I should have said more back then. I knew about the car. I knew she didn't leave." I told him it wasn't his fault. He said, "Some of it is." And maybe that's the truest thing anyone in Hinton ever said to me. Colette and I, we're still together. But the bridge thing put stress on us that I don't think is fully lifted. She supported me, never once told me to stop. But there's a weight now. She sees the town differently. I do too. We talk about moving sometimes. Late at night after the lights are off. She'll say, "What about Fayetteville?" And I'll say, "Maybe," and we'll lie there and not say anything else. I took a contract in Fayette County for most of 2024.
It was good to work somewhere else. Poor foundations that didn't have secrets underneath them. Simple work. Honest concrete. I'd come home sunburned and tired, and Colette would have dinner ready, and for an hour or two it felt like before. I used to think when I was younger, when I first started the business, that I'd do this until 65. Pour concrete, build the company, maybe hire a few more guys, retire with enough to travel. Take Colette to see the ocean. She's never been. 57 years old, and she's never seen the Atlantic. That was the dream. Small, but it was mine. I don't know what the dream is now. I'm still figuring that out. Mateo and I talk maybe once a month. He's not okay. I don't think he'll ever be okay. His sister was murdered and buried under a monument built in her name, and the man who did it shook his hand at the dedication. That's not something you process. That's something you carry.
He told me once, this was in April 2024, almost a year after they found her. He said, the worst part isn't that he killed her. The worst part is that the whole town let him get away with it for 4 years. And some of them are still angry at you, not him. I didn't argue with that, because he's right. Lena Mabry still runs the diner. I went in there last month for the first time in a while. She poured my coffee and she said, Arlo, you did a hard thing. I said I did the only thing. She said, that's what makes it hard. I thought about that for a long time driving home. The mountains were turning green and the road was empty, and I said it out loud in the truck to nobody. The foundation tells you what happened. You just have to be willing to dig. I drove past the bridge site last week, or where it used to be. They've started demolition. The deck is gone, the railings are gone, the brass plaque is gone. What's left is just concrete and rebar sticking out of the riverbank. I stopped the truck, sat there for a few minutes. The river was high from spring runoff. You could hear it from inside the cab with the windows up. A couple of birds were circling over the gorge. The mountains were green all the way up, that early spring green that only lasts a few weeks before it deepens. It was quiet, in the way that Hinton is always quiet now. Not peaceful, just empty of the sounds that used to be there. I thought about Renata, 28 years old, dark hair pulled back, laughed so loud you could hear her across the parking lot, wanted to open a real learning center with computers. She was on the board of the education fund. She found the missing money. She walked into a powerful man's office and told him the truth. She deserved more than a plaque. She deserved a life. And if you've been with me this whole time, from the staged concrete to the courtroom to the letters to the keyed truck, I want to say something to you, directly, not as a narrator, as Arlo. Thank you. I mean that. This story was hard to tell. There are parts of it I still can't think about without my hands going tight. The night I sat in that gas station parking lot with Mateo, the look on Colette's face on the porch, the way people I'd known for 20 years looked through me at the IGA. Sharing that costs something, but you stayed, and that matters to me more than I know how to say. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the things your town doesn't talk about, or the people nobody fought for, hit that subscribe button. Not for an algorithm, for these stories, because there are more of them, and they need people who listen all the way through. Leave a like if you stayed till the end. That sounds small, but it changes what the next person sees. And leave me a thought. Have you ever been in a place where everybody knew something was wrong, but nobody moved? Where silence wasn't peace, it was an agreement? Tell me about it. I'm reading every comment. If you want more stories like this, there's one right here on the screen. Click it. I'll be there. Orville was right, you know. Some of it is on all of us. My name is Arlo Mendieta. I'm 43 years old. I pour concrete for a living. And the most important thing I ever built was a case file at a kitchen table in Hinton, West Virginia. I'm still here.